If you're looking to upgrade your car stereo, maybe add a little more power, a subwoofer, but still want to retain your factory head unit and all the features that it controls within your vehicle, having an amplifier that'll help easily integrate into your car's factory system while giving you that flexibility to wire, tune, and set up is critical. I'm Cameron with Car Audio Now, and today I'm going to be giving you an overview of AudioControl's LC-5.1300 5-channel amplifier. I'll walk through some of its key features and controls that I think are important and show you how to wire and install it for a few common configurations. So let's start out by diving into some of the key specs of this amp. So this amplifier is a 5-channel, indicated with the 5 here, 1300 watts. This is peak, so 5-channel, 1300 watts peak. And 5-channel amps are usually a great choice for the standard or common 4-speaker car systems, 6 or 8 speakers if you include tweeters in some cars. They typically have 4-channel outputs for your speakers, plus a 5th channel that allows you to add in your subwoofer for bass. So it's great all-in-one chassis, so you don't have to wire, purchase, install a second amplifier for your subwoofer. It's all contained in a single chassis. And in terms of power ratings, you can see down here, these are all continuous or RMS ratings. This amplifier puts out 100 watts times 4 channels, plus 300 watts for your subwoofer at 4 ohms. 200 watts times 4 channels for your speakers, plus 500 watts for your subwoofer at 2 ohms if you want to run a 2 ohm system, or if you want to bridge the 4 channels into 2, you can do this with an output of 400 watts times those 2 channels at 4 ohms, plus a 500 watts at times 1 for your subwoofer at 2 ohms. And all of these ratings are RMS, of course. So let's go ahead and unbox it. The LC-5.1300 comes in AudioControl's amplifier sleeved box. You pull it out of the sleeve like this. You flip it open, and you'll find your quick guide, the amplifier quick guide on the very top here. It's the first thing that you see. I really liked the way that AudioControl clearly labels every component on the amplifier connection and the control panel with a simple description on each. You can see the the connection panel here, and then the control panel as well. They give you the descriptions with the lined, the numbers to correspond with each of the different components on the amplifier. Really helpful. It also, if you keep on scrolling, it gives you a few relevant wiring use cases with the details on how to configure and wire the amplifier depending on your application. So a couple of the common use cases and wiring cases for the majority of vehicles. I highly recommend you pull your amplifier out, remove the control panel yourself, and walk through this quick guide before installing and wiring it up. It'll give you a good foundation of the amplifier and just really set you up for success when you go to install this. Underneath, you also have a 2.5 millimeter Allen to remove the control panel, which I'll do in a moment here, of course. The amplifier, obviously, underneath all of this, it's neatly wrapped inside a plastic wrap. I already pulled this one out before, but so this looked much nicer the first time around. The plastic is normally on much tighter, but you pull the amplifier out and to see the amplifier itself. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and use the included 2.5 millimeter Allen to remove the set screws on the back here of the control panel. I'm going to do that right now. So now we can get a close-up look at the panel and all the settings, both the control and the connections panel. You can see here there are a ton of great configuration options on this panel. It might look a little crazy or daunting at first, but I'll help you run through some of the key things to simplify it. I actually really like the way that AudioControl configured and laid this panel out. They make everything pretty intuitive. Again, I recommend looking at the quick guide as well to understand what each of these are up front, cross compare. before we get into the control panel up here, let's take a look at the connection panel. On the left here, first thing you see is a set of 4 30 amp fuses for a total of 120 amps. I recommend in the power and ground terminals, either using a 4 or a 0 gauge wire for this amplifier. And the terminals you can see here are plenty wide to fit a 4 or 0 gauge wire. To the right of the power terminals, you'll see the RCA preamp signal inputs. This is where you'll either use the outputs from the back of the aftermarket head unit that you have, or if you have an existing line output converter, you can plug those RCAs from the converter or the head unit directly in here. And you can use a combination of inputs. For example, front only, rear and front, subwoofer, and front, or all three, or just one, right? I'll get into that in a little bit. But if you don't have a line output converter, you don't have an aftermarket head unit, and you need to use your car's speaker wire to provide signal to this amplifier without impacting or replacing the head unit and otherwise losing some of the functionality of your factory head unit, AudioControl has you covered with these speaker level inputs. This is where you'll take the speaker signal, the speaker wire, straight from your car's factory wire harness and plug them in here. And what I really like about AudioControl's amps is that they use these Phoenix plugs here. Let me pull one of these out for you. So you can see here, these are called Phoenix plugs. They use these for both the speaker level inputs, but also for the speaker output. And what these are nice for is really wiring up the amplifier without having to reach directly onto the amplifier, connecting the wire directly to the amplifier while it's installed, and connecting each individual wire to the amp, especially if you're using these speaker level inputs. You've got, 8 wires, 12 wires, plus the outputs. It's a ton of wires to wire up to an amp while it's installed on an amp rack or otherwise in tight quarters. So again, this is particularly helpful in tight quarters, or if you want to easily remove the amp from a vehicle, you really only have to undo the power and ground, the subwoofer output, and then you can unplug everything. So very easy to unplug all of these wired speaker level inputs and the outputs if need be via these Phoenix plugs. Moving on here though, you have what's called the ACR1 remote level control, and here you're going to plug in a wired control knob for your subwoofer that can be installed closer to the driver, wherever you want in the vehicle really, to have control over your subwoofer volume directly from where you install it. And that's just a little control knob. I thought it was interesting that AudioControl didn't provide this with the amplifier. A lot of 5-channel amplifiers do include that, but they do sell it separately. So check out the AudioControl store to find the ACR1 as well. And then finally over here you have the subwoofer output. Pretty straightforward. Minimum 2 ohms. So you can't run a single ohm to a subwoofer. You can run 2 ohms or 4 ohms. So now for the fun stuff, let's dive into some of the control panel features here. And I'm going to walk you through some of the key components here. I know it might look daunting, but really basic layout overall. Pretty easy to understand once you know what some of these components are. So starting on the left, you have what's called GTO signal sense, or great turn on, which basically lets you use the signal from your speaker level inputs here to turn on the amplifier instead of using a traditional 12 volt signal wire, amplifier turn on wire here from your head unit. So what this does is when you turn on the stereo of your car, it'll begin sending signal into the speaker level inputs here. And as soon as the amplifier detects that audio signal, it will tell the amplifier when to turn on and off. It simplifies wiring a bit when you're using a factory head unit that might not have a remote wire easily accessible, or it might use CAN bus. So you would, in theory, you have to tap into an accessory in like the fuse box. So this feature is really meant to simplify it for that use case. When you're using a factory head unit and don't really have access or might not have easy access to a 12 volt accessory or amplifier turn on. And what's cool about this GTO feature here is that if this is switched to the on and you're using this GTO feature, it'll actually turn this remote, and you can see this, it'll turn this remote plug here, or excuse me, this terminal here into an out, right? It'll actually, you can use it as a source of for 12 volt amplifier turn on. For powering other amplifiers or accessories. So you can see that it says remote in or out. Pretty cool when you use the GTO functionality, you have that enabled and you have your speaker level inputs. This turns into a 12 volt out, basically your traditional amplifier turn on. So pretty cool. To the right, now we start to get into some of the channel specific features, right? You have channel 1, channel 2, and then the subwoofer output. So this channel is meant to control the channel 1 speaker outputs right here. So everything that you see within this section will power the top here. This section powers underneath the channels 3 and 4. And then this little section right here, well, I guess I would say this whole section here, the channel 5 and the Accubit base will control the subwoofer output right here. So in the channel 1 to 2, the first thing you see right here is a front high level. So now some vehicles have chime alerts, other types of alerts that might come on when you open the door, you don't have your seatbelt on, right? Typically they're higher frequencies. And when you amplify a system without having control over those chimes, one of the big complaints is, when you have your gain set, and if your vehicle does pass those types of alerts, you end up blaring those chimes. So what this control here does is it'll take the signal that comes in from this front high speaker level input. It will filter out those higher volume, the typical higher frequencies for alerts that are sent to those front speakers, and you can control that volume. You can lower it down, raise it, depending on the vehicle. It'll give you that level of control over chime. Really cool, very easy, simple, and it's pretty straightforward. It uses the front high signal input specifically, and you'll basically just control the volume here. Next to that, you have a high pass crossover. Now, the channel 1 and 2 are specifically high pass. They don't have a low pass. So this high pass control allows you to set the frequency floor to prevent damaging your speakers with lower frequencies and bass, right? You can use the crossover range selector here to alter the range. You can see that there's 2 different selections on the frequency adjustment here. One has a white background, which is 500 to 5K hertz, which is the high on this selection, or it's 30 hertz to 300 hertz, which would be activated if you went to the low section here. Or if you flip it to the off switch, you're basically passing your full range of frequencies here. So pretty cool. And then you have your standard mode, mono, stereo. Typically this is going to be stereo, and your gains here as well. Moving to the right, you have the channel 3 and 4 control area. It's similar to the channel 1 and 2 with a few exceptions here. I'll call them out. First of which you'll notice the signal sum option. This is one of the cool features of these amplifiers too. Makes them pretty universal for situations where you might be limited in your signals, or at least acquiring signal from your speakers. This summing feature on both these channels will allow you to take the signal from channel 1 and 2 and extend it to 3 and 4 and ultimately 5 as well, by selecting this sum feature. So you'll basically toggle this to the left. So if you only have signal from, let's say, the front speakers via your input, so you either use the fronts here or the fronts here, that's all that you have access to. You can extend that signal from that 1 and 2 through to channels 3 and 4 here as well. Or if you have a dedicated signal for front and rear, so you're using both of these and both of these, right? You can do that as well by selecting the separate too, and that's what's going to allow you to retain your fader functionality, essentially by plugging those into the front and the rears, and then using the separate option. And you can see on the subwoofer channel here as well, well, right here, that it has this functionality too. So you can either use channels 3 and 4 for your sub, or you can use its own dedicated signal in here or down here if you have access to that. I would say that unless you have either an aftermarket head unit or an upgraded sound system in your car, typically you're not going to have sub input, so you're likely going to need to use the signal from channel 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 to power your subwoofer. So, you know, back to my example though, if you had only your front speaker signal and you extended that signal already from channels 1 and 2 to 3 and 4, and then you selected the sum feature for the 5th channel, you're essentially using one input for all channels, if that makes sense. So if you only have this channel, you click sum, you're basically using the signal from this channel and extending it all the way through to channels 3, 4, and 5. Pretty nice, gives some great flexibility to those who might only have those front and rear signals and have a little bit of limitations around the signals that they can grab in the car. Also worth pointing out, on channels 3 and 4, you have the crossover type selection here. This is not in channel 1 and 2. And what this selector gives you is the option to use a high pass or a band pass option. And for the band pass option, you can see that you have 2 frequency controls here, one for setting the frequency floor, and then one for setting the frequency ceiling. So let's say, just to give you an example, let's say that you're using channels 1 and 2 to power just a pair of tweeters, or like a 3.5-inch speaker in your dash, a pair of 3.5-inch speakers in your dash. Something that uses a very high frequency, and you've already configured your channels 1 to set that frequency floor for those tweeters, right? Then you wanted to use a pair of 6.5 mid bass in, you know, the door panels, right? You can use this band pass functionality to essentially biamp your to biamp and power your mids and your tweeters using the band pass functionality. You'll set the frequency range specifically for what you want your mids to cover and what isn't already being covered by your tweeters or your high frequency speakers, and also what's not being covered by your subwoofer, of course. So nice to see this option, the band pass option here, or you can select the high pass if you just want to use this as a high pass. Effectively will eliminate this, or it'll disable this, or you can select the off position if you're using like an inline DSP already and have those signals already adjusted to what you want. You just select the off and it'll pass whatever frequency comes into your input straight through to the speakers. Next here you have your AccuBase settings. This is a unique feature that AudioControl offers that helps you control your subwoofer signal in the case that your factory stereo tapers off your subwoofer volume when you crank up the volume. So in some vehicles, when you turn your volume up, let's say you have your volume for your speakers here, and then you have your volume for your subwoofer. As you turn your volume up, your speakers will increase in volume while your subwoofer sort of tapers off or lags behind, right? At a certain point. So I'll leave a link to one of AudioControl's video walkthroughs on how to set this up, but it's another great feature that makes this amplifier ideal for OEM integrations. It'll allow you to round out that subwoofer volume and make it linear or parallel with the rest of the system, so that as you turn your volume up, they're both moving up at the same level here. Check out the link in the description below to learn a little bit more about this feature and how to set it up. AudioControl does a good job, better than I would do at describing it. Finally, on the channel 5, you have your crossover frequency here. So this is essentially your low pass. You'll set this to set the volume, or excuse me, the frequency ceiling, so that it's not your sub channel isn't passing a 5K hertz signal to your subwoofer. This will allow you to set that standard and gains standard as well. Next, what I want to do, I want to start to demonstrate this gain optimization feature. You can see there are 3 LED lights here, maximized, 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 5. I'm going to hook this amplifier up to my test bench, give it some power just to demonstrate how you can use this functionality, this feature, to easily set the gains for your amplifier. It really simplifies it. So I'm going to hook this up to some power and demonstrate those features next. So quickly, before I start setting the gains here, just to show you what my setup looks like here, I've got this amplifier hooked up to my test bench, specifically to a Sony head unit. So I've got signal coming in at the front, I've got power, right? So I'm going to use this head unit and start passing a signal tone through to the head unit, which will in turn pass that signal straight into the amplifier. And I'm going to use that to start to tune the gains using this gain optimization feature. So let me go ahead and start doing that. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and use my phone, which is connected to that head unit that I just showed you, the Sony head unit. And I'm going to, I have the Kicker app open here. You can use YouTube, or you can use a raw download of a frequency file. I'm using, if you can see here, I'm using 1000 hertz sine wave. That's what I'm going to use to tune both my channel 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. You can use 40, 100, 500, 1000, or all of the above. I just use 1000 for, you know, all of my mid-range and my highs. But there's a lot of personal preference that goes into tuning gains and stuff. But just to demonstrate the purpose, I'm going to use 1000 hertz, and I'm going to crank up the gains. Before I start cranking up the gains though, I'm also going to turn up the volume to about 85% on this head unit. So I'll get to about 85%. And then once I've set my volume to the appropriate levels on the head unit, or your factory head unit in theory, now I can start to crank up the gains with that 1000 hertz frequency playing. So I'm going to do that for channel 1 and 2. And keep an eye on this LED here as I continue to crank it up. There you go. Now you can see this light indicator is lit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and back this off a little bit until it turns off, right? And it's that threshold between the light on and off where you're going to find your maximized gain setting, given the hertz that or the signal that you're using to test this. So for me, I'm using 1000. You can see as I crank the volume just slightly, it turns on and off. And now I'm going to do that for channels 3 and 4. And since I only have, is another good demonstration, since I only have front 1 and 2 in here, I am going to use channel 1 and 2 as a signal for 3 and 4. And I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. So let's keep an eye out on 3 and 4. There it is, right? So I'm going to back it off a little bit. And now 3 and 4 is optimized for, given this setting here. So 3 and 4 maximized, or optimized, I should say. 1 and 2 optimized. Now you can also do channel 5 as well. Same concept, using this maximized 5 LED indicator. You'll probably want to use a lower frequency to tune that, considering this will cap it at 300. I'm using 1000. Same concept though, pass maybe a 40 or 100 hertz through this, and then you'll use it in the same capacity to identify where to cap your or set your gains. Same concept. So this is a really nice feature. I like it because it eliminates the need for additional tools, right? There's like a $200 distortion tool that you can purchase that will connect into your inputs and identify distortion that way, or actually it'll use your speaker outputs as well. Or you can use a voltmeter. People have fancy voltmeters that you can use, which those methods in their own right are worth a 10 to 15 minute walkthrough video. So you can eliminate all that with AudioControl's gain optimization feature here. Very easy, and really simplifies it for installers and DIYers, especially, who really aren't familiar with gains or how you go about setting and optimizing those and preventing damage to your system. So pretty cool feature. So that's all I have for you today. Hopefully I covered off on all the features that you wanted to see and have a good, now you have a good understanding of what this amplifier is capable of doing. If you like the content of this video, please be sure to use the button below to subscribe to our channel. That's all I have for you today. We'll see you next time.